Pre-Columbian era, before 1492. Before the arrival of Europeans, Cuba was inhabited by indigenous peoples, primarily the Taino and Siboney. They lived in small villages, practiced agriculture, and were known for their pottery and tools made of stone and shell. Spanish colonization, 1492 to 1898. 1492. Christopher Columbus landed on Cuba during his first voyage to the Americas and claimed the island for Spain. 1511. Spanish forces, led by Diego Velázquez de Cuellar, began colonization, establishing settlements and enslaving indigenous people. Many Taino died due to disease and harsh conditions. 16th to 18th centuries. Cuba became an important Spanish colony, serving as a key hub for trade and military operations in the Caribbean. African slaves were brought to work on sugar and tobacco plantations, making Cuba a major exporter of these goods. 1762 to 1763. The British briefly occupied Havana, but returned it to Spain in exchange for Florida. Wars of Independence, 1868 to 1898. 1868 to 1878. The 10 Years' War was the first major attempt by Cubans to gain independence from Spain, led by Carlos Manuel de Céspedes. It ended in a truce with no independence. 1895 to 1898. The Cuban War of Independence, led by José Martí, Antonio Maceo, and Máximo Gómez, intensified the struggle for freedom. 1898. The Spanish-American War broke out after the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor. The U.S. intervened against Spain, and after Spain's defeat, Cuba was placed under U.S. military rule. U.S. influence and independence, 1898 to 1959. 1902. Cuba officially gained independence, but the U.S. retained control through the Platt Amendment, allowing American intervention and control over Guantanamo Bay. 1933. A revolution overthrew the dictator Gerardo Machado, leading to instability and the rise of Fulgencio Batista, who became a dominant political figure. 1952. Batista staged a coup, becoming a dictator, leading to growing opposition. The Cuban Revolution, 1953 to 1959. 1953. Fidel Castro led an attack on the Moncada barracks, which failed but sparked the revolutionary movement. 1956. Castro, along with Che Guevara and Raúl Castro, landed in Cuba and launched a guerrilla war against Batista's government. 1959. Batista fled and Castro took control, establishing a socialist state. Communist Cuba and the Cold War, 1959 to 1991. 1961. The U.S. attempted to overthrow Castro in the Bay of Pigs invasion, which failed. 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war as the Soviet Union placed missiles in Cuba, later withdrawn in a U.S.-Soviet agreement. 1965 to 1991. Cuba aligned with the Soviet Union, receiving economic support but facing U.S. sanctions and embargoes. Post-Cold War and modern Cuba, 1991 present. 1991. The collapse of the Soviet Union led to an economic crisis known as the Special Period in Cuba. 2006. Raúl Castro took power as Fidel stepped down due to health issues. 2014. Cuba and the U.S. reestablished diplomatic relations under Presidents Obama and Raúl Castro. 2018. Miguel Díaz-Canel became president, marking the first time in decades that a Castro was not leading Cuba. 2021. Economic hardships led to rare anti-government protests met with crackdowns. Today, Cuba remains a one-party socialist state, facing economic challenges, U.S. sanctions, and political tensions, but also maintaining strong cultural and national identity.